Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Inside Today's Boardrooms. I'm Eric Shore, Senior Vice President at Diligent Institute, and thrilled to be your host for this week's program. The topic of privacy made its way into the boardroom in a big way several years ago with new requirements like the GDPR in Europe and the CCPA in California. And it's clear today that the topic is only becoming more important as time passes. I'm honored to be joined by Harvey Jang, who serves as Vice President, Deputy General Counsel, and Chief Privacy Officer at Cisco Systems. Harvey, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Eric. Happy to be here.
Excellent. Well, let's dive right into it. The role of Chief Privacy Officer has evolved in recent years as regulatory requirements have changed. I wanted to get your take on what the strategic imperative of the CPO is today.
Yeah, it's changed a lot over the years. And I'd say overarchingly today, the CPO's primary role is to be a business enabler, or at least that's how I cast it here at Cisco. And looking back, it's really been interesting to watch the role change over the years. I'm going back 15 to 20 years ago when I first started getting into privacy. Privacy was typically positioned in the sales and marketing team and really focused on how to deal with customer contact preferences and demand generation. That has gone a little bit awry, right? And I think in 2003 is when the US passed the Can-Spam Act to deal with some of the marketing violations or intrusions that were going on with respect to email. That was this new thing. But kind of fast forward a little bit, you mentioned the EU's General Data Protection Regulation. That passed in 2016, and it conferred a set of core privacy rights to individuals and really upped the ante for compliance, right? With a threat of a 4% fine. And that 4% of what? It's 4% of your company's global gross annual revenue. So it's huge. It could be a potentially huge number. Now, no one's been fined at that level, but it's on the books and it got the attention of boards and executives. And just to make sure that people still pay attention to the Asian laws as well, countries like Japan passed similar legislation, and Japan actually has EU adequacy, so it's similar enough. But just to go one step further, Japan added criminal penalties as a potential for egregious violations. The executives could be imprisoned up to a year. So naturally, with these fines and sanctions and imprisonment, it got the C-suite and board attention, and privacy became squarely a compliance issue as well as a marketing one. Now, today, I'd say we're seeing a blended approach. It's both compliance and market access, right? If you look at where privacy laws are around the world, there are over 140 countries with privacy legislation. And you have to comply with the laws where you choose to do business, right? And on top of that, there's sectoral laws. And so it exponentially increases the legal compliance aspect of it. So if you're in healthcare, finance, telco, or any of these other areas, there's specific regulations on how you deal with data. So there's really no escaping the compliance requirements here. But then even with the 4% fines, what was interesting, what I found too when working at Cisco, the fines are there and there's a threat and it's material and it's on the books, right, that you have to pay attention to. But even more importantly, customers were asking about data and wanting more transparency and more control and wanted to really have more visibility on what's going on with the data that is entrusted with a company and what processing activity is going on. So if you don't meet these privacy requirements and you do business in the EU or around the world, we're seeing probably 20 to 20%, 25% of our revenue at risk if we don't meet the privacy requirements of our customers. And we've seen privacy become a core consideration in buying decisions, particularly with large enterprises, regulated industries, critical infrastructure, and government customers. They're very prescriptive and strict, and they outline what the customers need from the vendors to trust them and to buy from them. So that business imperative and that business enablement becomes a core responsibility of a chief privacy officer today. And using privacy as a competitive differentiator has really served my group well in positioning it as a business requirement, not just a compliance exercise.
Well, thank you, Harvey, for that background. I've noted sales, marketing, compliance, legal, data as just some of the functions that a chief privacy officer and team may work with. How do you make sure that privacy isn't a siloed function?
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting balance, right? Because laws like GDPR do require a level of independence for the chief privacy officer and ensuring that they are properly resourced to do what they need to do to handle personal data appropriately. But I'm fortunate enough at Cisco that we have really a strong tone from the top, like from our CEO and even board of directors. Like Chuck Robbins has come out publicly multiple times, calling out privacy as a fundamental human right and a business imperative. And so it's also tied, privacy is tied to our corporate purpose of powering an inclusive future for all. And so that piece of it, of really having that tone of the top, has helped my team, and I benefit from that in terms of designing and building our privacy program here at Cisco. And so we have a group called the Privacy Center of Excellence. And that's where we pull in the laws, pull in the market requirements, and really set the standards for Cisco, and sets us up in our position with respect to handling personal data. And so with the executive buy-in and support, we're able to cascade these standards into all parts of the organization, from product development to our enterprise business operations and IT. And so we do this with a process called the Privacy Impact Assessment, or PIAs. They're legally required, but we go one step further, and it's helpful to do these things because, again, that market access piece is critical. That trust is important, not just trust from our customers and users, but also our employees, that we have really sensitive data about them. And so using these PIAs as a mandatory step, right? In the product development lifecycle, we go through what we call a CSDL, the Cisco Secure Development Lifecycle. And the PIAs are a critical part of that. Like, you can't launch a product without satisfying the requirements of a privacy impact assessment. And your compliance with that gets reported out to our ELT, or executive leadership team, and basically our C-suite, and also to the board of directors. And similarly with internal processes or a new IT platforms or software that you want to deploy into our IT environment, that also has to go through a PIA and get approval of the privacy department, where we understand and help manage the risk when it comes to personal data. So having it embedded into our processes and having those gates, and the buy-in from senior leadership, and understanding that this is an important step and part of our brand, part of our trust story, that we need to make sure we respect individuals' privacy when we're handling their data.
And Harvey, you mentioned the board. How does board reporting on this topic work? What committee talks about privacy? How frequently do you present to that committee? And more generally, how does it roll up to the full board?
Yeah, we started doing this study called the Privacy Benchmark Report. Every year we come out with it, where we survey IT executives from around the world. And I think we're in our 5th or 6th year of this report. And as you were mentioning, privacy has become a board level issue. And the vast majority of companies report some metrics or some issues related to privacy. So there's both the reactive and proactive side of board reporting. And kind of on the more positive, proactive side, Cisco has a board committee called the Environmental, Social, and Public Policy Committee. And that meets quarterly. And it discusses issues around environmental sustainability, human rights, diversity, equity, and inclusion, privacy, global trade. So kind of a broad swath. And so as the chief privacy officer, I participate in those meetings. We meet quarterly to just talk about strategy and what are we doing? What are we seeing in the space of this broad domain of environmental, social, and public policy? And what are the things that we're doing to get ahead of the issues and position Cisco for success? So that's the proactive, positive side. And of course, there's the reactive, like if something were to go wrong and there was some sort of major critical issue or risk, or a data breach, for example, that if it reached a material level requiring an 8K filing under the new SEC rules, those would get reported immediately to the board through our chief legal officer and our chief security and trust officer. And they also meet quarterly and have a standing slot to talk about security and privacy and other issues. So there's constant reporting to the board about our security posture and protecting personal data and privacy, and then also mechanisms for emergencies and escalations for immediate reporting if necessary. Hopefully it doesn't have to get activated, but it's available and the process is there.
We're almost out of time, Harvey, but one lightning round question for you, which is that if you are a board member at a company and a chief privacy officer were presenting to you, what's one question that they might not think of that they should ask someone who sits in your role?
Yeah, I mean, I'm hoping that they think of this, right? But I think overarchingly, the board should ask and know who's responsible for the company's privacy and security programs. I mean, just the fact that they have a program is absolutely required, and knowing that someone is responsible and accountable for managing data and personal data more specifically within the company. But looking at it from a perspective of where's the business opportunity, how are you using personal data for your operations, and in some cases to monetize and further business imperatives and initiatives, and also how are you managing and protecting and respecting privacy rights when you're dealing with this data set.
Well, more than one question, but great advice, Harvey, to all the board members and members of management teams who are watching our show. We are out of time for today. A huge thank you to Harvey Jang, Chief Privacy Officer at Cisco Systems, for joining us, sharing some of his wisdom on such an important board topic. We will see you next week.
Thanks for having me.